Hey everybody, Tag Left Unfree. Hey, today I thought I would take a shot at building community from a 30,000 foot view. I know I get a lot of emails and a lot of calls and a lot of texts and a lot of messages that say, hey, we really want to do this. How do we do it? What are some of the things we should consider? And those kind of things. So I thought I would just, spend a little time talking about community from the 30,000 foot view. So if you're interested in the dynamics of the broader picture of community, come on, let's check it out. Here you are, alone, dreaming of community but not knowing where even to start. Or maybe you've got a couple people who are just not very active, or maybe you're blessed because you're sitting around with your community watching this video for entertainment purposes. But either way, I believe before we begin the process of building community that it's super critical we do two things. The first one is, what's the goal? What are you trying to achieve? See, because if you can't clearly articulate this, you need to stop right here and go figure it out. If we don't understand what we're trying to achieve, how will we ever achieve anything? So there are many reasons to want to start a community. The clear erosion of our way of life is enough reason to seek help and the support of others. If you're watching this video, then you are already the unworthy. You are the purge, you're the domestic terrorist, and you are the guilty. As the digital dollar and the ESG systems continue to roll out, how will you survive if you're already not worthy? How will you get the basic essentials you need for life? Will you compromise your position? If you don't get busy and do something about it, I bet you will. See, community is the great fix for all of these challenges and so much more. But again, we must first start by identifying the why. What I would do is I would start and just write down the top 5 or 10 reasons that you seek community. And it might look something like this. I want to feel safe. I want to be productive. I want to achieve common goals. I want camaraderie with other freedom-minded people. I want to work on something bigger than just myself. I want to influence the local landscape. I want to create commerce with other like-minded people, both locally and nationally. So once we have these 5 or 10 reasons, what I would do then is I would set down and combine all of them to create a mission statement. So your goal would come out something like this. I want to create a safe and productive environment for our freedom-loving brothers and sisters through creating community and building a refuge inside this region. Through the constant effort in the schools, the churches, and the political environment, we will establish a redoubt. These redoubts will be linked together to create a parallel economy. This goal will also be useful later when you're trying to vet people. How closely do your goals line up? This goal will be the building block for everything to come, and this is super important. Don't half-ass this. Spend time here making sure you understand what your goal is. The second of those two things that I wanted to talk about is you really need to focus in on what are the threats around you and then what are the resources available at your particular location. And this matters to building community, and I'll explain why. But for those of you that have not seen it, I produced a video some time ago titled How We Found Our Land. And in this video, I did a needs and threat analysis to locate a perfect location. And if you haven't watched it, I would pause this video. I would go back and watch that video because it'll make understanding this video so much easier. So real quick, let's talk about the threats. So understanding what threat you feel is important will allow you to plan much more effectively. Let me give you some examples. If I felt that climate change, for example, would bring on a severe drought, I would move water way up my resource list when I'm trying to figure out where I want to live or trying to analyze the place that I already live, right? And if the threats around you prohibit you from experiencing this productive community, you need to stop right here and turn your attention on to moving to an area that will help you achieve those goals. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about which state is better. Instead, I'm going to help you find the answer for yourself, right? But let's look at some potential threats and how it may affect your community. So to me, and guys, we're all going to be different, right? This is something that you have to do on your own individual basis. But to me, the biggest threat to all of us is population. I don't believe that the powers that be care for you or me. I believe that they only care about the safety and the continuance of the government. I believe that no help is coming. So we have to understand that good people are going to do horrible things when their kids are hungry. People often ask me, hey, what do you think about this state or that state? And I always ask them, so how many people can reach you in a tank of gas? Based upon my research, the average tank of gas will get you about 300 miles. And so I would start and take this, a step further, maybe double it and say, okay, I'm going to focus in on 600 miles. So if 600 miles is my goal, what I need to do is 600 miles from my location in any direction would create a circle the size of 1,200 miles. Does this make sense? Right? Because if they could get from point A to me in 600 miles and the other side, point B to me in 600 miles, the distance between the two would be 1,200 miles. You should also consider these natural barriers to the lines of drift. And when I refer to lines of drift, I'm talking about migration, right? People coming from one place to the other. And so if you could put natural barriers between you and the population, this will minimize the impact of that golden horde. The golden horde is a term, I believe, that was coined many, many years ago, but James Wesley Rawls has used it a lot to describe that great migration that will certainly happen. These barriers that I talk about, for the natural lines of drift would be things like the Appalachian Mountains, the Rocky Mountains, the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, any of these kinds of large barriers that will make it much harder to reach you, well, assuming you're on the right side, right, of that barrier. So why does this matter when building community? Why did I say all of this? Well, if I'm located in a spot where tens of millions of people could reach me in a tank of gas, this would impact my ideal size of a community, right? It would also impact the skills and the traits I'm looking for in a community member. Does this make sense? So basically, I'm just analyzing what's around me, both from a resource perspective and from a threat perspective, right? And so what I'm trying to understand is what will it take to build a successful group? Another threat that I would really consider is climate. And your location, is your location conducive to growing all your own food? Are you located in a place that will require compliance to the system? Like, are you allowed to collect rainwater, right? Can you gather enough water? If the pumps were turned off, would you be able to grow your own food? No matter how great your community is, if it can't support itself, then all we've done is we've set this community up for failure. There are many other things to consider in this, like political climate, industry, FEMA routes, military bases, nuclear plants, biodefense, transportation methods, air traffic, chemicals, 5G, 6G, taxes. How much of the land in the state that you're in does the government actually own? One of the things that attracted me to where I'm at, the state of Kansas, 96% of the land is privately owned here. And this is super available. All you gotta do is look it up on online. I could spend hours talking about analyzing the threat, but that's not the topic of this video. So we've talked about threats. Real quick, I want to take just a quick dive into resources because the lack of them is also a real threat. So the first resource I would look for is obviously community. Does your location offer you the population to build community? And what you might think that I mean here is numbers of people, but that's not really what I mean. What I mean is, does your location have enough like-minded people? What is the political climate where you live? What makes people tick where this particular location is? It isn't necessarily numbers. And you can identify this by, do you have, farmers markets or community events that would be considered favorable to your goal? For example, there are several gun ranges around me. These are great recruiting grounds, but what it also tells me is there's a populace that will support them. Growing season is a very important resource as well. Can you grow enough food? How big of a community could you support where you're at? Personally, I think you got to have at least a 6-month growing season. If your community is presented a situation where you only have yourselves to depend on, how do you think you will fare? The resource of energy is an equally important one to the first two that I covered, and that energy is an absolute force multiplier. With energy, every job is easier, and without the ability to create energy, the energy you're going to use is going to be your arms and your legs and your back. How many hours of sun do you get? Is wind an option? You have to understand the resources available to you. The last one that I'm going to go into real quick is just water, because water is essential for life. Water was way up on my list when I did my threat needs analysis, and it should be way up on yours. As I asked before, if the pump stopped working, how would your community survive? We've got to understand, the annual rainfall for both our survival, but we also have to understand it for growing food and raising livestock, right? If you have to haul in water, right, to where you're at, if you got to hire a truck to bring you water in, then you're just a slave to the company that has to bring you in water, and then you're also a slave to that regulation. And so this is why it's such a critical thing. It's becoming more and more important to understand how clean is the water that we use, right? With all the chemical spills that we've heard of. And, there's been reports that have come out about millions of people are being affected by arsenic they're now finding in waters. And so I thought I would share with you guys just real quick, which states have the cleanest water, right? Interesting enough, number one on the list was South Dakota, followed by Minnesota, New Hampshire, Kansas, Missouri, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Hawaii. Right? So those are the top 8. Now you could obviously go and internet search this and come up with, wherever your state is. But when you're doing your threat and needs analysis, or you're doing your resource analysis to understand what kind of water you're coming from, I think is super critical. As I mentioned, these things are available to all of us. It's just a simple DuckDuckGo search, right? There are many other resources that must be identified, like soil type, availability for wood, for building and heat, propane and natural gas. There's so much to think about that will have a huge impact on the success of your community. But one word of caution, there's not a single place in the United States of America that meets every criteria. This is why I asked you to pause this video and go back and watch the How We Found Our Land video, because every community will have differences in their threats and in their needs and in their resources. If the threats you identify become a reality, your community will be so thankful that you did your homework to help the community accurately prepare. And in addition, when your community is properly set up to take advantage of the natural resources, you will look back at this discussion and you will be thankful that you went through the work. I get asked very often, how do you exactly build a community? The word community is thrown around, kind of like the words, like freedom or liberty. To define what a community is for you would be essential to your success. Community is such a complex word. It isn't a singular item. There are many types of communities, both small and large, and everything in the middle. There are communities united around religion and sports and political beliefs. So when we talk about building a prepping or, homesteading community, we are still looking at multiple communities. As I continue to build and grow the community, I focus my attention on 6 separate communities. And I'm going to kind of cover all of these guys with you because I think it's super important to understand, that 30,000 foot view. The first community I refer to is the clan. And, this is your family, right? This is your husband, your wife, your kids, your brother, your sister, your mother, and your father. And before you can achieve the goal of getting a larger community or a group of people on the same page, it would be critical to get your own clan on the same page, right? Commitment, to me, is the most important virtue of all virtues in building communities. Nowhere is that commitment more important than inside these individual clans, right? Getting the adults inside each clan or each family, pushing the string in the same direction is the first building block to the larger community. 100% of your effort right here should be directed at securing your clan first. If you build a house on a shabby foundations, the results will struggle. If your clan is secure, your attention should now go on to building, that next circle, which is the crew, which you guys have heard me talk about many, many times. And, the crews are typically made up of lots of, different clans. So how do we meet these other clans, right, in efforts to do that? There are homesteaders and preppers, guys, in every state. But I'm going to tell you, you got to get off the couch and take some risks. You must be willing to get out and talk to people. I can't tell you the number of people who approach me about community and they say, man, I just can't find anyone in my area. And then when I ask them what they've done, about it, what are they doing to meet other people, they really don't have an answer. So how in the world can you expect to build a community if you don't leave your house? It's just simply never going to happen. What are the regular events that go on in your area that may contain, like-minded people as you search? What virtues would your ideal, diarrhea communities have? And then you can take these virtues, the things that you're looking for, and figure out what do people who have those virtues, what will they have in common? Where will they go? What are the things they will do? And there's many ways we can look at these virtues. One could look, for example, into politics, and you could say this would be helpful on the surface at least, but I would argue that there are things that are much more important. As I mentioned earlier in the video, that commitment is the most important of all the virtues. Where would you find people who are committed? and committed to the right thing, right? And I would argue that people that I would want to hang out with would first be committed to their families. So what activities are family committed people engaged in? How do these people voice their commitment to their family? And so I'd like to kind of go down this rabbit hole just a little bit. Would you say that parents who are attending their child's soccer game is committed to their family? And is this the type of commitment you're looking for? Would you say that the parent attending the school board meeting is committed to their family? And is this the type of commitment you're looking for? What would you say that people who are shopping at farmers markets, are they demonstrating commitment to their family? Would you say that people watching, let's say, the latest movie at the movie theater, is this with their family? Is this a level of commitment? Are either of these or any of these commitments the types of commitments you're looking for? Because I would tell you, if I went through those 4 questions, I could certainly prioritize those 4 into which commitment I was looking for more. I mean, do you understand? Right? We're just qualifying. We're taking an educated guess at where the people that I would be looking for would typically be hanging out. Here are some other things that I think are important in people to look for. So you guys know that I just talked about how, to me, commitment is the number 1 most important virtue. I believe attitude is number 2. Because when the pressure's on, when the hardship comes, who wants to be around that super negative person? I mean, how many of you guys know that person that no matter what you say to them, no matter what's going on, they have something negative that happened to them in their life, or some reason that they're a victim, some reason that something has done wrong to them every moment of every day. And I just don't want to have to live in a super high pressure environment with people like that. I want to be around the person who is making fun of me after 12 hours of hard labor. I want the person who can bring the morale up when it's needed most. And so I personally watch for this closely. The third virtue I would look at is character. Character would be the next virtue, at least for me personally. Everywhere I go, I'm looking at the behavior of people. Do they take advantage of other people? Do they look to serve? Are they eager to help? Are they the only interested in what benefits them? Do they gossip? Do they speak ill of people? One of my favorite, character checks to go through is simply the drive-through window. How do people treat people who can offer them nothing? To me, this is a great sign of who somebody is. Following character, the next for me would be skills. And if you remember, we looked at the threats and resources earlier. What skills would be useful in navigating the threats we identified, right? Because if a lot of people could get to me closely, then I'm going to put skills like being a rifleman higher up on the list. When if I'm super, super remote and not a lot of people can get to me, it wouldn't be top of my list. Maybe it would be animal husbandry or something else, or hunting, right? They say that knowledge weighs nothing, and with enough skills inside your community, your survivability will be greatly enhanced, right? So the final thing I'm looking for, and to me the least important thing on my list, is what I call supplies. Because you know how a lot of preppers, they just pack it to the ceilings, right? And it might surprise you that I put all of these logistical items that people have stored for all of these years and spent all this money last on the list. But I put it last on the list because all supplies will run out. So to me, supply is only important in the short-term event. And at the very least, people will not be a refugee as we try to figure out how to provide for ourselves, right? So it just buys a little bit of time. So my list is commitment over attitude, attitude over character, character over skill, skill over supply, and in this order. Now, all of these attributes are important. And guys, I'm going to get all kinds of people on here who are going to say, oh, no, character is the most important one. The thing is, guys, is it's different for everybody. Right? And for me, I argue it this way because even with the greatest character in the world, if you're always in a bad mood and I can't get you to show up, what good was it? Which is why I order them in the order that I order them. But to everybody, it's going to be a little bit different. So at the end of the day, though, where do we find people with commitment, good attitude, character, skills, and supplies? To me, I would take this search now and I would break it apart into 2 specific categories. So I'd be looking at a local approach and a national approach. Now, your local approach is typically going to be a low technology approach, when a national level is going to be more of a high technology approach. But let's talk about them both. So first, let's talk about the local approach. The first thing to do is get involved locally. Become a regular at the farmers markets or the gun ranges, volunteer at the community events, look at the local ham radio clubs and the hunting clubs. I mean, can you volunteer at, let's say, a local homeschooling community? Your local political movement will also help you in a lot of ways, because the people in those boxes basically will lean more your way, whether that be Democrat or whether that be, Republican, but it will lean more your way, and you'll typically have a friendly ear. And I'll tell you that every county in America has a local political presence. Every one. Every county has a Republican Party, and every county has a Democrat Party, and many of them have independents, and many of them have other ones, green parties, and et cetera, et cetera. But on a national level, we can begin to look at places like Facebook, Craigslist, to identify the local groups with similar interests, right? So we can look at places like freesteading, right? Go into freesteading, find your state, and go in there and, meet some people there. Freedom Cells is another one. It was founded by a guy named Derek Brose and John Bush, and this does a lot of the same things that freesteading does. PrepperNet's another one. Even the Survivalist boards, which was just a board, basically people put posts on, even have individual state pages. But there are so many places that you can help to grow your community, and there's no reason you can't be successful unless you yourself are not committed to the process. Okay, so now we've got a few people. Now what? Okay, so I will tell you that your community is either growing or dying, and there is no middle ground. I made the mistake very early on in my life in this world. We got to a certain point and we just shut it off and said, hey, we're great right where we're at. The problem is you're always losing people, things in people's lives change as people have falling out, etc. And then by the time you have these falling outs and all this, and then by the time you get the machine picked back up and going, it's all falling apart. So you gotta, in my opinion, you always have to be growing. If you're not, you're dying. So I look at community really as a series of interlocking circles. The smallest, as I mentioned before, was the clan, and we already discussed this, right? This is my individual family, me and B and the boys, The next circle would be the crew, which, we've talked about this in a lot of my videos too, and the crew is just the group of people who make the community go. They're the most involved. They help make decisions about the community. When I get a great deal on something like lumber, for example, or something, I'm always looking to the crew first. And if I need help, or I have an emergency, these are the people who usually come running. You guys have seen in my previous videos, we've done things called homestead rotations, where everyone shows up at one homestead. We do a bunch of work together. 80% of the people who come there, I would consider the crew. And because we are actively working for the benefit of each other. But a special note on this, people will move in and out of these circles, right? Not just in the crew, but also in all the rest of them that we're going to discuss. And they're moving in and out of them based upon their own actions. It's really never, at least in our world, it's really never a declaration. I always tell people, if you want your voice heard, then speak up. If you want to be involved, then be involved. And if you're involved, it'll take care of itself, right? So it's really not a declaration. It's a statement made by each person based upon their actions. The crew actively works for the better of the communities by creating things like newsletters and buying clubs and, facilitating events and festivals to get everybody else, together. So you broaden that circle out just a little bit and we'll get to what's called the MAG. And this stands for Mutual Assistance Group. You guys have heard me talk about this in many of my videos. This is typically a regional group, but of people who attend the events and the festivals and those kind of things. They're like-minded, they're semi-involved. These people will participate in the local parallel economy. They will offer their goods and services and you will exchange them for yours, right? This circle, in my opinion, is also the most important circle to create the crew from. I think you should spend more time at the MAG than you do at the crew because from the MAG is where the crew comes, right? Think of this as kind of a, pre-qualified pool of people. Right? So they're pre-qualified, meaning they're already like-minded. You've already had a chance to hang out with them a lot, right? This is where you get to pull them from. And this pool of people, is really what's expected again to grow into your crew. People also move in and out of this community based upon their own actions. And if I can't do business with inside the crew, this is the first group I'm going to look to for either passing on some great deal I've got, or if I have a particular need or a particular want. Now, keep in mind, guys, inside this MAG, there could be several crews. In the MAG that I think about in our community, there's 4 or 5 crews inside of there that make up that MAG. So the next community let's talk about is the Mind. And again, you guys have heard me talk about this many times. The Mind is all of you. It's all the like-minded people out there, right, from across the country and across the globe. And the Mind would consist of many MAGs and many crews and ultimately many clans, right? The Mind serves several purposes, right? But first, it's a recruiting pool for the MAG, right? Remember we talked about how we pull the crew out of the MAG. Well, you're going to pull the MAG out of the Mind, right? And this is why this also needs its attention. It's the networking arm of all the communities. This is how we create the parallel economies and the parallel societies. I mean, imagine communities across the country working together for the benefit of all the communities. Wouldn't this be just amazing? I mean, this would certainly be a future goal of the mind, in my opinion. Now, there's two other circles on the outside. I don't really talk about them much. I've mentioned them briefly in a couple of my videos, but there's really two out there, and I just want to cover them real quick. So these circles are really more of a regionally based circle. The first one I call the friendly, and I just called it the friendly because these are businesses and local-minded people who are friendly to my mindset, but really haven't made that jump into the community, right? I think attention should be given to the friendly because this is where you learn, what resources you need. Hey, I need a well drilling company, I need an electrician, I need a plumbing, whatever you don't have already inside your community. These are the places we're going to go first to make sure we're spending our money at the very least with someone who's like-minded. And a lot of times these people are who end up being funneled into your local mag, which ultimately will come out into your crew. But it also allows us to reach resources, again, not available inside our communities. And this is what's so important because we talk about a parallel society. What that parallel means they're just running along each other. But I'm going to tell you 100% freedom is almost impossible. So there's going to be times where, your parallel is dipping into the other one because you need something. What better place than to be able to take it to someone who is already friendly, right, to the movement. And it's someone also that you can really push and help as they go through their growth, because you got to remember that everyone is at a different place in their journey, right? And it's all of our jobs to help bring them along. The last circle, and I don't think I've ever talked about this on a channel, but I think it's important to bring it up for this one. And this last circle is what I call the naughty, and it's exactly the opposite of the friendly, which basically means these are people that we will purposely not do business with. These are local contractors and businessmen that actively work against freedom in our opinion and our definition. So kind of think of it as the local naughty list. And this is good, right? Because we get to vote with our dollar. We can send our money and our resources to the friendly, right? To the mind, to the mag, to the crew. And then we can also make sure we keep it out of the hands that are actively working against you and I's freedom. But building your circles of communities is a lot of work, and it takes a huge commitment from everybody. I've told many people this, but in the beginning, when you are just starting and you have, just a couple families, or you're at the very beginning, it is super hard. I always tell people getting 0 to 5 is the hardest spot. Getting from, just your clan inside your home to another clan to another clan. So 0 to 5 is super hard. It's much easier to guide, but it's much harder to build. Getting to 5, as I mentioned, is the absolute hardest thing. But once you get there, let's say you get to, from 6 to 20, that next set of, families together, it's easier from some regard in that you get to gain momentum, right? So if you have something to offer, if you're doing, your community events and your homestead rotations, and people will naturally want to be involved. Through the use of social media, newsletters, and events, your community will snowball. It will grow faster and faster. But once your communities have grown to this side, there is much more to do. And this is why I said it's easier in some regard, right? You can now effectively do things like advertise for land. You guys have seen me post a whole bunch of videos. That's because we're big enough now. There's a big enough community around here to help support. If you're not using social media, then this step will obviously be much slower. This size requires the creation of things like newsletters and resource manuals and things that we've talked about before. But again, they're not rules, right? All they are is saying, hey, this is what's going on, and if you want to be involved, be involved. And we'll get back to that a little bit later in this video. Once you get over to 20, you get 21 or 30 or 50 or 60. Now the real fun begins, right? Because now we get to make a run at influencing our county from the political perspective, which I think is super, super, super important. We get to place skilled community members in important positions, like the county commissioners or the school boards, right? And you can ensure that somebody from the community is at every meeting of importance. We can impact local law enforcement by joining the reserves or their active duties if we choose to do so. We can control what is taught at our schools by at least being involved, and at the very best by placing members again on the school board. We can influence the local medical systems by lobbying for more of a direct care model. All of these things will only work if your community is seen as an attribute to the greater community, right, to your county. So this is accomplished through service to the county in which you live in. Can you imagine the ground you could make by having the majority on any or all of these boards? in one particular county, man. Creating these different circles are essential to the growth of your community. Most people I know, they go at this whole, in my opinion, they go at this totally wrong. But what they do is they select the first 4 families they come across in an effort to build, this Mad Max survival group. And this works great until the honeymoon phase is over and people start irritating each other, right? I have seen groups fall apart for some of the silliest reasons. So now you've got all these people, right? How in the world do you manage it all, right? How do you govern it? Governance and sovereignty are 2 of the most important things to consider when you're talking about actually keeping a group together, right? So as many of you know, I've been part of many communities and, obviously they've all failed, right? Because I'm no longer with them. But I've been blessed with all of these amazing opportunities to learn how communities work and what works great and what doesn't work so great. As I reflect, back on those experiences, the one thing that continues to come up over and over and over again is the word sovereignty. See, without sovereignty, people constantly look for where they belong. They constantly look for where they are in the pecking order. And instead of focusing on what's best for the community and instead of focusing on building and the common goals that this group had set forth, this leads to resentment and it leads to hard feelings. It has a tendency to blow up the tiny things. And you've heard me mention in the past the bowl of cereal, right? So what is sovereignty and what does it mean? Well, what it means is that everyone has skin in the game, right? Everyone has ownership. Nobody is a serf. Nobody is a refugee. If I could go back to the very beginning, I would not have looked at the community as a single location, but rather as a mindset that joined us all together. This is why I'm always putting out videos for land for sale, right? It's my experience that people will work together if they have a place to retreat to. They will work together if they have sovereignty, right? Nobody wants to deal with the my house, my rules thing. Nobody wants to deal with all of that. I mean, you get yourself in a position to where you're in a group and the guy in charge is simply in charge because he owns the land. What's the chances that you chose a good leader? I would argue almost 0, and I'll get to that point as well. I think it will become necessary at some point for families to join each other at one location or another. And in fact, I think it's probable that like-minded community members end up bunking together at one location. I think this issue is inevitable. But one of the ways to combat the need for sovereignty is to create as many landowners as I can. This allows all of these people who end up a refugee or end up in those spots to really be able to move around, to be able to yoke up, right, in the cliques that better serve them or better meet their beliefs or whatever it is. I've learned so many lessons over time, but one of them that I want to talk a lot about is the bus, right? So the bus will not drive itself. And I have said this over and over and over again. If you and the other members of your community are not committed to give of yourself, and if you're not committed to being inconvenienced, that the growth of your community will become stale. Remember earlier we talked about how you're either growing or you're dying, right? There is no middle ground, and if you become stale, you're dying. The leaders are never appointed in the minds of the members, right? If you declare yourself to be the leader, most people won't accept it. They may not say anything, they'll go about their day, but they won't accept it. You must demonstrate leadership in order for the members to acknowledge it. Leadership is a topic we could do many videos on, and in fact, maybe we will someday. It's something that I'm super passionate about. But for today, I would just like to add that good leadership is crucial to the outcome of a productive community. Most good leaders, though, will not want the job because they know what it is, right? A good leader will take none of the credit, but will take all of the blame, and this makes this role very hard to fill. If you ask a group of people, you've got all these people you've put together, and you walk out in the middle of the room and say, hey, who wants to be the leader? Anybody that raises their hand, anybody that speaks up should be immediately eliminated from the position. Okay? Never forget, you cannot lead if you cannot follow. I'd like to take a moment, too, to talk a little bit about delegation and roles, because I think this matters a lot in getting a community to run smoothly, right? If you're constantly butting up against heads all the time, right, it makes it very, very hard. So one of the key jobs, I think, for a leader is to be able to recognize the strengths in people. If you can understand each skill set, then what you get to do is you get to assign tasks that will be well performed and well accepted. And this is super important. Well performed and well accepted. If you take a deep look into each community member's background, you pay attention to the work that they gravitate to and then the work they want to gravitate away from, pay attention to their ideas, this will help you put the right butt in the right seat. And if you can get the right butt in the right seat, you won't be managing anything, right? It will manage itself. So anyway, let's do a real quick recap of everything we talked about today. So what we've got to do is we've got to determine what is the goal. What are our threats and what are our resources? We have to understand that community is a very broad word, right? We have to develop our circles and every one of them need attention. This is the part that a lot of people miss. You can't just focus on the crew. You can't just focus on the mag. All of these circles need attention. You've got to prioritize your community virtues. What matters is, I mentioned to you guys earlier, commitment, attitude, character, skill, and supply, right? If you go down those lists, those are things that I find super important, but yours may be very different, right? Local and national efforts require two different approaches. You can't try to go after this in an effort to build a community on the local and the national stage and then do it in the exact same manner. You'll have subpar results. The hardest part in building community is 0 to 5. Getting to 5 is the absolute hardest part. Never forget, you cannot lead if you cannot follow, and there's a but for every seat. The art of building a community takes a ton of work, and even more than that, sacrifice, and an understanding that of the 30,000-foot view, right, the big scope. I hope that you notice nowhere in this rant did I talk about rules. Most people, including me, in my early years, that's where we wanted to start, was what are the rules? See, I think the 10 Commandments are enough rules. How can we live ungovernable if all we do is create rules? I always say, live freer today, because community takes this statement to the whole next level. With community, all things are possible. Hold the line. Don't give an inch. Tag out.